talk about the latest conflict and what's going on. 4 senior members in Iran's security forces have been killed in a suspected airstrike on the Syrian capital. This is Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard blaming Israel for the attack. It said it killed 4 military advisors as well as a number of Syrian forces. Now, Israel hasn't commented on this, and for years, though, we know Israel has been carrying out strikes on Iranian-linked targets in Syria. Now, the Revolutionary Guard is a major military, political and economic force in Iran. They've been present in Syria since the civil war began there in 2011, helping to support the regime of President Bashar al-Assad against widespread rebellion to the rule. Now, this comes on the back of something that is really important to us here in the UK. And this is Matt Jukes, who is the Metropolitan Police Assistant Commissioner, says it is hard to remember a more unstable, dangerous and uncertain world, and that the United Kingdom faces the most acute period since the Cold War in 2023. It's a really stark interview indeed. He said police have seen an unprecedented rise in the threat from terrorism following the conflict in Gaza, which has become a radicalisation moment. He, of course, is Britain's most senior counter-terrorism officer. There has been a 25% increase in intelligence coming into counter-terrorism police, a significant increase on our usual levels. There has been a huge amount of intelligence about violent extremism as well from online reports, public reports, and from MI5. He goes further to say Islamist extremists have been energised by the conflict. He said the speed and scale of the impact on global events are extraordinary, even within the context of our own experience. Well, joining us now is John Strawson, Middle East expert and Professor Emeritus at the University of East London. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
This conflict rumbles on, of course, the UK very much in there with its allies as well, but the ramifications to this country and that stark report from Matt Jukes, the Met Police Assistant Commissioner, I think is deeply concerning.
Well, of course, I think we are in a most unstable world, and I think one of the most interesting statistics that perhaps explains that or underlines that is that yesterday there was a report in the Times that the British Army is sunk to its lowest level and is predicted to actually go down from 79,000 to 52,000 soldiers over the next 4 or 5 years. Bear in mind that Hamas, at the beginning of the war with Israel, had 40,000 and under arms, and that Hezbollah in Lebanon, an Iranian-backed organization, has nearly 70,000. So you can begin to see that the instability that we might have politically is also underlined to some extent by the way in which Britain is really quite unprepared, I think, for the kind of world in which we're now living.
Can I just ask you the same question I asked yesterday? So we're spending about 2.3% of GDP on defence. There are calls for it to be much higher. NATO countries, many of them not meeting even their requirements to be at 2%. We heard that Russia is now spending 40% of GDP on defence. So essentially, if we're unprepared, we need to buckle down, pay more to defence, recruit people and make sure our military are properly prepared, equipped, and also that we have warships available, unlike the fact that we only have HMS Diamond, the only Type 45 destroyer able to be used. The rest of them are mothballed at the moment.
Yes, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, in the Middle East at the present time, we've just upgraded in the Red Sea our alert systems, I gather, or it's been commissioned by Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary. So there are some things taking place, but quite frankly, we are not being serious about the way in which we need to upscale defence preparation. That includes at every level. So we need much better intelligence, we need much better boots on the ground, and also much better equipment. And I think that the truth of the matter is that we are now in a really dangerous situation where, as I said, the military militias of private organizations, political organizations, are actually stronger in their complement than the British military forces, which does seem to me to be a really stark statistic.
I would agree with you. When you look at the ramifications, we're also talking about the changes and what people are feeling in this country, there is definitely a sense from our viewers that they don't like what's happening, the pace of change in this country. Also, they're worried that religion is playing far too big a part in this country as well. Obviously, we have this warning of terrorism as well. When you look at the number of referrals to the Counter-Terrorism Internet Referral Unit, there have been 3,000 referrals for objectionable material. 700 have been identified as having a link to the United Kingdom breaching legislation. We also have the UK threat level running at substantial, meaning an attack is likely, but they continue to review all the information. They've also opened a unit to deal with hostile state actors dealing with this threat from Iran, from Russia and from China. What do you make of that people are jumping on this conflict and that Islamist extremists have been energised?
Well, we're in a period which is not unlike that of the 1930s. And don't forget, as Britain sort of approached what was going to become the Second World War, British society was also very divided over how it understood what was taking place in the world. You had people in Britain who were in the Mosley's organization supporting fascism, supporting the German fascism, Italian fascism. You had people, a large communist party which supported the then Soviet Union. And so that British society has never really been a united society having the same view. So you had very different views in the 1930s, and I think we have very different views today. And it's not so much that it's a rise of religion, although I respect your poll results on what people are saying about schools and religion. And basically what we now face is, in terms of Islam, is not a rise of Islamic religion, but a rise of Islamic politics. That really began with the Iranian Revolution in 1979. And that is what we are now seeing in Gaza, and also, of course, in the conflict which is taking place in Syria with the yesterday's attack on the Revolutionary Guards base in Syria, essentially. So I think that it's not just religion, it's a question of how unscrupulous politicians have tried to turn religion into a political force.
That's really interesting. And the fact that you mentioned the 1930s, General Lord Dannatt has also warned of a serious danger of history repeating itself. Do we never learn?
I'm afraid not. I think that people have very short memories, and we now have very, very short attention spans, and partly because of social media, actually, and also to some extent, programs like yours, 24-hour news programs and so on and so forth, people move from one thing to the other very quickly. There's an awful lot of things that people have to worry about, from the environment to the cost of living, let alone the threats of terrorism or the war in Ukraine or the war in Gaza and so on and so forth. So I think we do have very short attention spans, and also we don't tend to look at the long view. And I think one of the big problems of all politicians is that they work on a short-term basis, which is how to get elected in the next period as best as they can, and they don't really look at the long term. And what we actually need is some long-term thinking about what kind of shape of the world that we want and what we think is possible to achieve.
And Dannatt also reiterates your comments. He draws parallels in the 1930s, saying that it was the woeful state of our armed forces in the 1930s which failed to deter Hitler. Here we are again, cutting defence spending, engaging in multiple wars across multiple fronts around the world, and of course our enemies see us as weak.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you think of it, we have a Conservative government which has been in office, will be this year 14 years. And of course, it was in the 1930s a Conservative government which pursued the policy of appeasement. And I think that it was reported yesterday that, our current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, doesn't do defence or foreign affairs. He's much more focused upon domestic issues. And that, I think, is quite interesting if that report is the case. And that we seem to have a malaise when it comes to the question of what we want to do, what we need to do internationally, And I think that is a big problem. And I think that's going to be a very big challenge, not only to the Conservative Party, but also to the Labour Party in the next general election, is what they can offer the British people in terms of making a major change on the way in which we approach defence. Because I agree with what you said originally, we need actually to increase defence spending to at least 3%. And it is high now compared to some other NATO countries. But the fact that we have such a diminishing land force, as you point out, a very small navy, this is really, and we have also, by the way, aging nuclear weapons at the same time. So there's an awful lot of things that if you really want to take it seriously, both major parties are going to have to look at this question of defence, given this very unstable and quite dysfunctional world in which we're now living.
John, really good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time. That's John Strawson, their Middle East expert and Professor Emeritus at the University of East London. Let me just give you some facts. We're actually decommissioning 2 ships because we can't recruit enough staff to go onto those military ships. HMS Diamond, as I said, is the only Type 45 destroyer at sea out of 6. So we've managed to get 1 out of 6 at sea. Fort Victoria, that's the only Royal Fleet auxiliary ship, is out of action, undergoing maintenance. So that is fairly concerning. And we've also sold 2 vessels, which were decommissioned. The new ones arrive in 2031. I mean...
Look, David, I could have listened to John all day, actually. I thought he was really, really interesting on this. And actually, it did make me think during that actually it's not about religion, is it? It's about ideology. That's what it's about.
100%.
Yeah.
And he made the point, actually, it's not about the religion, it's about the politics. And that is right, and it's being hijacked in the name of religion.
And yet, as it is being hijacked, and we do find ourselves at greater and greater risk, as you rightly say, our forces and our equipment is being diminished by the day.
I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I mean, clearly, what he was making the case for is you need a much longer-term view of this, because actually you can't have these 5-year cycles where we cut defence. The fact the Prime Minister doesn't do defence, I think is pretty indefensible.
Do you think that's because these politicians, like Sunak, like Starmer, actually much prefer to believe we're in a really open and kind world, and they are major players on that global stage?
I do. I do. I also don't think that they have the backstory, that they understand the horrors of the Second World War and what we went through, and the fact, and that parallel of the 1930s, and the fact that John brought that up, and that is what Dan had said as well.
Yes.
Someone needs to listen, and quickly.
And at the same time, we have this rise in anti-Semitism that we are seeing across the world, not just here, we're seeing it across the world. It's all playing to the same playbook.
It is. Intolerance. And as you say, politics being masqueraded underneath religion.